This year's G7 summit opened with a bang. Donald Trump made his entrance wearing his iconic Make America Great Again cap, a symbol that's as divisive as it is instantly recognizable. But this wasn't just about fashion, it set the tone. Welcome back to the channel where we break down geopolitics, power, and money without the fluff. While other leaders arrived with carefully prepared statements and unified talking points, Donald Trump showed up in a MAGA hat. In today's video, we'll break down what really happened behind closed doors at the G7, how Mark Carney tried to manage Trump's presence diplomatically, why Trump was surprisingly less abrasive this time, why he left before the summit ended, and whether the G7 can still function without its most powerful member fully on board. Stick around because what happens at summits like these often reshapes the entire global economy. Now, let's set the scene. The world's top economic leaders gather for urgent discussions on war, trade, and climate change. And Trump strolls in like it's a rally in Michigan. He was in campaign mode from the second he stepped off the plane. The MAGA hat wasn't just a nod to his base, it was a signal Trump is back and he's not here to just play nice. Mark Carney, former Bank of England and Bank of Canada governor, is a kind of figure global elites trust, calm, technocratic, fluent in the language of climate finance and central bank coordination. He was in diplomatic overdrive. According to insider accounts, Carney had to tread carefully, balancing the optics of Trump's return with the need to actually get things done. As Trump began giving freewheeling comments to the press, hinting at tariffs, blasting NATO spending, and pushing back on climate agenda points, Carney made a quiet but firm move. He cut the press short and moved everyone behind closed doors. Why? Because time with leaders at a G7 is very precious. You don't waste it playing PR chess. Every minute spent managing headlines is a minute lost on policy coordination, and Carney knew Trump's presence could quickly suck all the oxygen out of the room. Carney had one goal: contain the Trump effect long enough to let the other leaders make progress. Hey, if you're getting value from this, go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next one. It really helps the channel grow. Here's what's interesting. Trump wasn't as fiery as in past G7s. No public jabs at Justin Trudeau, no major trade blow-ups with the EU. Even Japan's Prime Minister Kishida got through talks without a showdown. That's not to say Trump has changed his worldview. He hasn't. He still believes US allies take advantage of American markets. He still thinks multilateralism weakens American leverage, and he still fundamentally is skeptical of institutions like the G7. He was less confrontational, but no less clear. Sources close to the summit said Trump reiterated tariffs are coming back, especially on countries with persistent trade surpluses with the US, including Canada. And then he bounced. He skipped the final sessions, didn't stay for the joint closing statement, and was airborne before dessert. Trump left the recent G7 summit in Canada early on Monday night, missing the second day. The second day, of course, included talks with Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky. Trump said he left early because he had to go to Washington to deal with the Israel-Iran conflict, according to a report by the Financial Times. But sources said that Trump was annoyed with French President Emmanuel Macron, who opposed Trump's plans about Greenland. Trump also wasn't interested in meeting Zelensky at the summit. Zelensky has been invited to the upcoming NATO summit in The Hague and attended the dinner on Tuesday. By leaving early, Trump did what he's always done: remind the world that American participation is optional and conditional. This brings us to a bigger question. Can the G7 function if the US isn't fully committed? Let's be real, the G7 without the US is like the NBA without the Lakers, Inter Miami without Lionel Messi. You can still play the game, but the main attraction is gone. The United States accounts for over 40% of the G7's GDP, more defense spending than all the other members combined. The world's dominant currency, tech firms cultural exports. When the US disengages, the G7 becomes a forum for managing decline, not driving progress. But the world, of course, doesn't stop. So what did the G6 manage to achieve? On AI and tech governance led by the EU and Japan, the G6 pushed forward a framework for ethical AI use, especially around defense, surveillance applications. It's still non-binding, but it lays the groundwork for future regulation outside the US tech hegemony. On Ukraine aid, despite Trump's skepticism of further US military involvement, the remaining nations reaffirmed their support for Ukraine financially and politically. Germany and France offered increased guarantees on defense contracts and infrastructure loans. On climate finance, Canada and the EU committed to raising their contributions to climate mitigation funds for developing countries. This was partly to counterbalance the US hesitancy and show leadership on global climate commitments. On BRICS nations' counter strategy, there were side discussions led by Macron and Scholz about forming deeper ties with African and Latin American nations as a counterweight to BRICS expansion. It's early, but the G7 is clearly watching the Global South alignment very closely. The 2025 G7 was a snapshot of a world in transition. Trump returned wearing the same hat, saying the same things, but with more power than ever. Mark Carney played the adult in the room, managing Trump just long enough to let diplomacy happen. The G6, of course, moved forward cautiously but significantly. Does the G7 still matter? Yes, of course, but it's evolving from a club of aligned democracies to a fragile balancing act between unity and divergence. The real question for the next few years isn't whether the G7 survives, it's whether it can lead without full American participation, because the future of global governance might depend on that answer. If you want more deep dives like this, where we unpack global summits, power shifts, and economic narratives with nuance, hit that like button and subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.